The minute you give it a meaning, you got emotion, and then the third decision comes. From your emotion, you decide what to do. So how does that relate to what I shared with you? Well, my father focused on the fact he'd not fed his family. How do I know? Because he said it under his breath a million times, right, during that day. He was angry at himself, angry at the world. I focused on there was food. What a concept, right? It's so.
Hey, you're hungry.
But where the biggest difference was between us was not that I was better or worse. It's just the meaning he gave it. I know that
He was
too.
too proud. He was too
proud, and he kept saying it over and over again. And so he decided in that emotional state to leave the family. My entire life, the reason I'm here with you is because of one meaning difference. My dad had always said, no one cares about anybody else. And we lived in a community where I thought people were rich. They were lower middle class, but we were literally on the other side of the railroad tracks. We were looked down on. And it looked like he was right. But now that day changed everything because my brain went, strangers care. It's not true that people don't care. Somebody didn't even want credit and they fed my family.
Yeah.
And that made me want to take care of strangers. And it's starting me on this journey. So I promised myself, at 11 years old, I'm going to do this for at least 2 other families. I didn't have the word pay it forward in those days, but I'm going to make sure I share this. I think it started because I love people. I hate to see people in pain. And I suffered a lot in my youth, as a lot of people do. I had 4 different fathers. We were very poor financially, but even worse was just the fighting between my parents. And my mother was a beautiful soul. I wouldn't be who I am without her. But when she mixed alcohol with prescription drugs, she was a different person. She was quite violent. So I was 5'1" in high school. She would grab my hair and smash me against the wall till I bled, or she thought I was lying and I wasn't. She'd pour liquid soap till I threw up. It was pretty extreme. If she'd been the mom I wanted her to be, I wouldn't be the man I'm proud to be, because I had to become a practical psychologist. I learned how to manage her moods and her emotions. And honestly, that was the beginning of it all for me. I went to a seminar by a man named Jim Rohn, a personal development speaker. And I went because I was working for this guy that was a janitor. And then on the weekends, I'd do anything to help pay for money to keep the family going. I was 17, just turning 17. And this guy, I worked for him and I worked hard, and he took me out for lunch afterwards. Said, "You're the hardest working kid I've ever had working for me." He was buying and selling homes in Orange County, California in the 70s and flipping them and doing well. And he used cheap labor, right? Which is what I was. And I said, well, my dad, and I wasn't trying to be funny. When you're a kid, you don't realize. I said, well, my dad said you used to be such a loser and now you're so successful. Like, how'd you do that? And he said, your dad said, what? And so he goes, well, it's pretty true. He goes, I said, what changed? He said, I went to a seminar. I said, what's a seminar? Never heard the word. He said, well, it's where a man takes 20, 30 years of his life and condenses it, someone who's successful, and shows you exactly the pathway of how they did it so you can save yourself. I said, wow. I said, how much is that thing to go to one of those? He said $35, which would be like $250 in today's dollars, right? Yeah. Inflation. And I'm making at the time $45 a week, $40 a week, $42.50 a week, literally.
Big
and so it was like a week's choice. So I said, hey, could you get me in? And he says, sure. But he didn't follow up. I said, well, will you? And he said, no. And I said, why not?
Yeah.
He goes, because if you don't pay for it, you won't value it. I said, I'll value it. Trust me, man. I'm on my own. I'm 17.
There's a little bit of truth in that, for sure.
So I struggled for what I thought was the biggest decision of my life financially, a week's pay to go learn from some guy I've never met before. But I made the decision, and then I eventually went to work for Jim Rohn as a speaker. I was 17 years old, and I went out and did talks, and I was an evangelist because I saw how much it could change people's lives. But he gave me a gift, and one of the greatest gifts he gave me, it taught me a lot of philosophy, simple stuff like, for things to change, you got to change. For things to get better, you got to get better. Like total 100% responsibility. But also, I remember asking him about my fathers. I said, all 4 of my fathers were good men.
All 4?
All 4 of them. But we were always broke. We're always wondering where the next meal's going to come from. There's short times when we didn't, where they're fully employed, but it didn't last. And I said, why? And I said, why is this school teacher makes, those days was $35,000 a year, and this hedge fund guy makes $1 billion a year? That's so unfair. And he said something I'll never forget. It changed my whole life. And it stacked on what I'd learned earlier. He said, Tony, we're all equal as souls in this world, but we're not equal in the marketplace.
Wow.
I said, what does that mean?
That is so true.
He said, well, the teacher's equal. These people are equal. He said, let's look at McDonald's. He said, think about this. Can you make twice as much money in the same amount of time? Are there people that do that? I said, well, sure, more than my family does. 10 times? 100 times? I said, yeah. He goes, how do they do that? I said, I don't know. He said, I can tell you right now. They find a way to add more value to other people's lives than anybody else. They do more for others than anybody in their industry, and they dominate their industry. He said, take McDonald's. Somebody goes to work at McDonald's, and I forget what it was then, X dollars an hour, minimum wage. He goes, people complain about it, but it's not supposed to be your long-term job because anyone can learn to do that job in about an hour. These days, not even that. They got pictures. You don't even have to speak English, right, to do it. And they're going to be replaced by machines now. But he said, look, that's a beginning job. He said, the teacher, you're talking about, if you're not willing to take risks, you don't get rewarded at the same level. They want to be rewarded for the time they're there, not for the results. I said, but I had some great teachers. He said, so do I, but how many of them? I said, I had 2 or 3 that were really great. He goes, out of all your education, and they worked with a small number of people. He said, that guy who made $1 billion you're talking about, he had a 40% return last year. He said, he's creating futures for all these nonprofits. He's creating money that's helping to compound so kids can go to college. He made $30 billion for people, so he got $1 billion. But what was interesting is I learned that from him, and I put it to work. I went to work for Jim Rohn, then I started my own company. Then I started studying patterns. Like I started to realize everything's a pattern. History has patterns, financial investments are patterns, how to grow a business is a pattern. And so I started working with, I got a chance to turn people around. I learned something called neurolinguistic programming, how language affects the nervous system. And instead of
Language, the way you say something, or
yes, how it can change someone's nervous system.
So how you stand, how you say loud, lower, deeper.
If somebody's depressed, their shoulders are more down. Where's their head? Down. They're going to talk loud or quiet, faster, slow. You change someone's shoulders, you change the tempo of their breath, the tempo of their speaking, a gesture, and their entire biochemistry changes. So I'm known for taking all these people who are depressed and show them how to turn around and how to then sustain it. But I started doing that, and I started challenging psychiatrists, saying, give me your worst patient, I'll have them in 1 hour. A guy that been working with a woman for 7 years with a snake phobia. I did it on stage, and that launched me. So that became my tool. Now, today, I train therapists. They get credits for studying my work to stay, their continuing education credits. But back then, I was, a young kid, proving myself. And I was
And is it lasting? I mean, is it?
Absolutely lasting.
So people know that, and they feel, and they start standing taller, more strength.
Well, it's even more than taller. It's that your brain works differently. Your emotions are different. It's a new pattern of how you think and feel and behave. So everything is interpreted from a different level. So when I learned that, then I started to turn around sports teams, and I got famous for doing these 1 hour or less turnarounds. Like I took the snake phobia and wiped it out in 20 minutes and wrapped the snake around this woman. But gradually then I started to work with some athletes in the Olympics and turn them around, and then Nelson Mandela and the Mother Teresa, then Bill Clinton, and then gradually I learned how to build businesses. And I have 114 companies. We do $9 billion in business across all these industries. And I have no traditional education. It's all from learning from the best and applying it. And then I teach other people how to do it. So you see all the things stacked. Like it was great, that experience and the meaning of people care. I care about people, huge. But then Jim Rohn teaching me what it takes to really grow and to make a difference in the world by adding value. The combination of those and then the skills I learned, all those things dropped in place. But I often say, I'm a good person, you're a good person. I've always been a good person, but would I be working this hard to feed 100 billion meals if I was well fed as a child? So I try to tell people your biography is not your destiny. And the goal is figure out how to use what happened to you versus being used by it.